The words echoed through the canyon like a prayer to an empty god. Thomas Brennan's horse shifted beneath him, sensing the weight of the moment. Behind him, chained to the twisted oak that had witnessed a dozen hangings, Clara Whitmore pressed her face against the rough bark. Her dress, once the color of summer wheat, hung in tatters, stained with 3 days of desert dust and something darker. "Please don't leave me here," she whispered again, and this time her voice cracked like dry leather. Thomas didn't turn around, couldn't, because if he looked at her face, really looked, he might not have the strength to ride away, and riding away was the only thing keeping her alive. The irony burned in his chest like bad whiskey. 6 months ago, Clara Whitmore had been the untouchable daughter of Judge Whitmore, the kind of woman who walked through Salvation Creek like she owned every grain of sand. Her father's money had built half the town, and his iron fist had buried the other half. Thomas had been nothing but dirt under her polished boots, a failed rancher scraping by on borrowed time and stubbornness. Now she was chained to a tree in Devil's Canyon, begging him not to abandon her. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of sage and stone that had swallowed better men than Thomas Brennan. The nearest water was 8 miles south, the nearest town was 12 miles north, and somewhere between here and Salvation, the Crow Creek gang was waiting. Thomas pulled his hat lower, shielding his eyes from the late afternoon sun that painted everything the color of dried blood. His horse nickered softly, eager to move. Smart animal. It understood what Thomas was trying not to think about, that staying meant dying, and dying meant Clara would be alone anyway. But leaving meant living with the sound of her voice forever. "Thomas," she said his name like it was the last word she'd ever speak. "I know what my father did to you. I know about the foreclosure, about the cattle, about—" Stop. The word came out rougher than he intended. The chain clinked as she shifted, and Thomas felt something inside him snap. Not break, snap, like a guitar string wound too tight, vibrating with a pain that had no name. In his saddlebags, he carried water enough for one person to reach town, food enough for one person to survive, and in his heart he carried the weight of a choice that would define every remaining day of his life. The sun was sinking fast, painting the canyon walls in shades of amber and shadow. Soon it would be dark, and in the dark the coyotes would come. After the coyotes, worse things. Thomas closed his eyes and made the only decision he could live with. "Your father ruined me," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the 20 feet of desert that separated them. "Took my land, my cattle, my future, left me with nothing but a horse and a grudge." Clara's breathing was shallow, desperate. "I never knew." "You knew." Thomas finally turned in his saddle, and the sight of her nearly broke his resolve. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her green eyes, the same eyes that had looked through him like glass for years, now held something he'd never seen before. Fear, real, bone-deep terror, but also hope, dangerous, foolish hope. "You knew, and you didn't care," he continued, "because I was nobody, just another dirt farmer who couldn't make his payments." The chain around her wrist had rubbed the skin raw. Thomas noticed because he noticed everything about her now, the way her chest rose and fell, the way she favored her left leg, the way she kept glancing toward the canyon entrance as if expecting Salvation to ride in on a white horse. It wouldn't. Thomas knew that better than anyone. "The Crow Creek boys took you 3 days ago," he said, his voice steady, despite the war raging in his chest. "Sent word to your father, $50,000, or they'd leave pieces of you scattered across the territory." Clara nodded, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Judge Whitmore refused to pay." The words hit her like a physical blow. She sagged against the tree, the chain supporting more of her weight than her legs. He refused. Thomas had been there when the message came back, had watched the color drain from the gang leader's face as he read the judge's response. "Keep her. I have 2 other daughters. So they sent me to kill you instead." Thomas lied smoothly, figured a man with nothing left to lose might do their dirty work for free. It wasn't entirely untrue. The Crow Creek gang had tracked him down, all right, had made him an offer, kill the judge's daughter, and collect the bounty on her head. or watch them burn Salvation Creek to the ground looking for her. They'd given him 3 days to think about it, 3 days to choose between revenge and redemption, 3 days to decide what kind of man he really was. Clara was staring at him now with those green eyes, and Thomas felt the familiar rage building in his chest, the same rage that had kept him alive through the foreclosure, through the shame, through the long nights when he'd dreamed of watching Judge Whitmore's empire crumble. "I should do it," he said, and meant it. "Should put a bullet in you and call it justice." "Then why haven't you?" The question hung between them like smoke. Thomas drew his Colt, the weight of it familiar in his palm. Clara didn't flinch, didn't close her eyes, just watched him with that steady green gaze and waited. In the distance, dust clouds were rising on the horizon, riders moving fast. The Crow Creek gang was coming to collect their answer. Thomas holstered his gun and reached for the water in his saddlebag. The hoofbeats started as a whisper, a soft thunder that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Thomas handed Clara the water skin, watching her drink like a woman dying of thirst, which he supposed she was. "How many?" she asked, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "5, maybe 6. Thomas squinted at the dust cloud growing larger against the red sky. "Enough." Clara tested the chain around her wrist, pulling until the metal bit deep enough to draw blood. The oak tree was old and thick, its roots deep as the canyon itself. A man might break the chain with enough time and the right tools. A woman, even a desperate one, wouldn't have either. "They'll want to know why you haven't killed me yet," she said. Thomas nodded, checking his rifle. 18 rounds. Against 5 or 6 men who'd spent their lives killing, it might as well be a slingshot, but it was what he had. "Tell them I wanted to make you suffer first," he said. "Tell them you begged." "I did beg." The admission sat between them like a loaded gun. Thomas had heard powerful men beg before, usually when they were about to lose everything, but he'd never heard Clara Whitmore ask anyone for anything. The sound of it had nearly unmanned him. The riders were close enough now to make out individual horses. Thomas recognized the lead horse, a black stallion with white markings that belonged to Jake Morrison, the meanest son of a bitch ever to ride out of Missouri. Behind him 4 more shapes materialized from the heat shimmer like demons rising from hell. "When they get here," Thomas said, not looking at Clara, "don't say anything, don't even look at me. Understand, Thomas, understand?" Clara nodded, fresh tears starting down her cheeks. The black stallion crested the ridge first, its rider silhouetted against the dying sun like something out of a fever dream. Jake Morrison sat his horse the way other men sat throne chairs, like he owned everything his eyes touched. His hat was pulled low, but Thomas could see the gold tooth that caught the light when he smiled. He was smiling now. "Well, well," Jake called out as the rest of his men fanned out behind him. "Thomas Brennan, didn't expect to see you again so soon." Thomas stayed mounted, his hand resting casually on his gun. "Jake, you got something that belongs to us." Jake's eyes found Clara, taking in her torn dress and bloodied wrists with the same interest a man might show a wounded deer. "Question is, you planning to hand her over, or do we need to take her?" "Depends," Thomas said. "You bring the money you promised." Jake laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Money? Boy, the only money in this deal is the bounty on her pretty little head. $2,000, dead or alive." Behind him the other riders were spreading out, cutting off any escape route. Professional killers, every one of them. Thomas had known this moment would come, had planned for it, but planning and living through it were different things entirely. "Seems to me," Thomas said carefully, "a man ought to be able to collect his own bounty." "Seems to me," Jake replied, drawing his gun with practiced ease, "a man ought to know when he's outgunned." The canyon fell silent, except for the wind through the sage and the soft jingle of spurs as the riders shifted in their saddles. Clara pressed herself against the oak tree, making herself as small as possible. Thomas looked at her one last time, really looked, and saw something that made his chest tight. She wasn't afraid anymore, she was angry, and in that anger, he saw the woman she'd always been underneath the pretty dresses and polite smiles. A woman with iron in her spine and fire in her blood. A woman worth saving, worth dying for. Wait, Clara's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Every eye in the canyon turned to her. She pushed herself away from the tree, standing as tall as the chain would allow. The setting sun caught her hair, turning it to flame. I have something you want, she said, looking directly at Jake Morrison. Jake's smile widened, showing that gold tooth. Lady, the only thing I want from you is confirmation that you're dead. My father's safe, Clara said. The combination, 50,000 in gold and silver, cash money. Thomas felt his blood turn to ice. She was bargaining for her life, but Jake Morrison wasn't the bargaining type. He was the type who took what he wanted and left the rest to the buzzards. Clara, don't, Thomas started. Shut up, Jake snapped, never taking his eyes off her. Keep talking, princess. Clara lifted her chin every inch the judge's daughter despite the chains and dirt. Untie me, get me to Salvation Creek alive, and I'll open the safe myself. $50,000, more money than you'd see in 5 years of bounty hunting. One of Jake's men, a scarred brute named Pete, leaned forward in his saddle. Jake, we could what? Jake's voice dropped to a whisper. Trust the word of a woman who'd sell out her own father to save her hide. The words hit Clara like a slap. Thomas saw her flinch, saw the momentary doubt cross her face, but she recovered quickly, straightening her shoulders. My father left me to die, she said, and her voice carried the weight of that betrayal. Why should I protect his money? It was then that Thomas understood. Clara wasn't just bargaining for her life. She was getting her revenge, against the father who'd abandoned her, against the system that had made her a commodity to be traded or discarded, against all of them. The safe's in his study, she continued, behind the painting of my mother, 1732, 9. My birthday, my mother's birthday, the day she died. Jake was listening now, his greed warring with his suspicion. $50,000 was more than his gang had made in their last dozen jobs combined, but it meant keeping Clara alive, getting her to town, trusting her word. Even if you're telling the truth, Jake said slowly, what's to stop you from calling for help the minute we ride into town? Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Help from who? My father's already written me off as dead. The sheriff's on his payroll. The whole town's afraid of him. She was right, and they all knew it. Judge Whitmore's word was law in Salvation Creek, and if he wanted his daughter forgotten, she might as well be a ghost. Besides, Clara added, her eyes finding Thomas's, I'm already dead to everyone who matters. The words carried a weight that had nothing to do with bounty hunters or stolen gold. Thomas felt them settle in his chest like stones. He thought about the woman he'd thought he knew, the untouchable princess in her ivory tower. That woman had been a mask, a role she'd played, because it was what everyone expected. This woman chained to a tree, bargaining for her life with dirt under her fingernails and fire in her eyes. This was who Clara Whitmore really was, and somehow impossibly, that made everything worse, because now he understood what he was about to lose. Jake was weighing his options, his gold tooth catching the last rays of sunlight. Behind him, his men waited for orders, hands resting on their guns. In the growing darkness, a coyote howled somewhere in the distance. Time was running out. 50,000, Jake said finally, holstering his gun. But if you're lying, princess, I'll make sure your death takes a very long time. Clara nodded, her relief carefully hidden behind a mask of grim determination. Thomas felt something die in his chest as Jake dismounted and approached the tree. Hold on, Thomas said, his voice cutting through the canyon air. We had a deal. Jake paused, his hand on the key to Clara's chains. Deals changed, Brennan. This is bigger than some $2,000 bounty. Not that deal. Thomas's voice was steady, final. The other one. Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes. Behind him, his men tensed, hands moving to their weapons. Clara looked between them, confusion written across her face. What other deal? She whispered. Thomas never took his eyes off Jake. The one where I keep you alive by making sure they never leave this canyon." The words hung in the air for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then Thomas drew. His first shot took Jake center mass, spinning him away from Clara. His second caught Pete in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse. The remaining 3 men were already moving, guns clearing leather, when Thomas dove behind a boulder and started counting bullets. 16 left. The canyon erupted in gunfire. Lead sparked off stone, whined through the air, thudded into the oak tree inches from Clara's head. She pressed herself flat against the trunk, screaming Thomas's name over the chaos. Thomas made every shot count. A lifetime of hunting jackrabbits and coyotes had taught him patience, precision. When the smoke cleared 3 minutes later, 4 men lay still in the desert sand. The 5th, Pete, clutching his wounded shoulder, was trying to crawl toward his horse. Thomas walked over and put a boot on his back. "Keys," he said simply. Pete fumbled in his pocket, produced a small brass key stained with blood. Thomas took it and put a bullet through Pete's head. 5 rounds left. Clara was sobbing when Thomas unlocked her chains. The metal fell away, leaving angry red welts around her wrists. She threw her arms around his neck, and for a moment, just one perfect moment, Thomas let himself believe they might have a future. Then he remembered the rest of it. "Clara," he said gently, pulling back to look at her face, "there's something you need to know." She was studying his eyes, and he saw the exact moment understanding dawned. The hope died first, replaced by a terrible knowledge. "You're not coming with me," she whispered. Thomas shook his head. "The Crow Creek gang's got 40 men scattered across 3 territories. When these 5 don't report back, they'll come looking, and they'll know I killed them. Then we run, we leave tonight, ride to California, start over." "Clara," his voice was infinitely gentle, "look at me." She looked and saw the truth written in his eyes, the blood spreading across his shirt from where Jake's dying shot had found its mark, the way he favored his left side, the growing pallor of his skin. "No," she breathed. "No, no." Thomas caught her hands in his, felt the warmth of her skin against his fingers. "There's a horse tied up the ridge, water and supplies in the saddlebags, enough to get you to the next territory. Thomas, please, in my coat pocket, letter to my cousin in San Francisco. He'll help you start over, ask no questions." Clara was crying now, great gasping sobs that shook her whole body. "Don't leave me here, please, don't leave me here."
Oh.
The words that had started it all, the plea that had broken his heart and sealed his fate. Thomas smiled, tasting copper. "I'm not leaving you, Clara, I'm setting you free." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and final. When he pulled away, her tears were falling like rain. "Go," he whispered, "before more come." Clara looked at him for a long moment, memorizing his face. Then she turned and ran toward the ridge, toward the horse, toward a future he'd bought her with his life. Thomas sank down against the oak tree, watching her figure disappear into the darkness. Around him the desert was quiet, except for the wind and the distant call of coyotes. He closed his eyes and waited. Years later, when Clara Brennan, she'd taken his name because it was the only gift he'd never been able to give her, sat on the porch of her house in San Francisco and watched her children play in the garden, she would remember that canyon, would remember the sound of gunfire, and the taste of his kiss, and the weight of freedom in her hands. She would remember how love sometimes meant letting go, and how the bravest thing a man could do was choose who he died for. In the end, Thomas Brennan had looked back, really looked, and found something worth never returning for.